I think we'll get started. We might have some more people trickling in. There's a sign-in sheet rotating around. Make sure that you do sign in because it will be entered in the drawing for the raffle prize. And so today's topic is tips on handling difficult situations with sensitivity and respect for confidentiality. And Jeanne Herrick, our I know you as our legal person at the system level, is here to present that topic for us. And I think she's going to start by kind of finding out who we all are.
Yes.
So thank you for coming.
So yeah, if we could start, I know some of you, but not all of you, so if we could just go around and tell me what your name is and what your position is at the college.
Hey, I'm Linda Bono, Department Chair for Accounting and Business.
Anita French, Department Chair for Education.
Sharon Cronin, Alice.
Susan Krug, Financial Aid Director.
Becky Clarkin, Library Director and Staff Steward.
Lynn Sminsky, Corporate Manager, Business and Training Center.
Dr. Mia Snickers, just Department Chair for Hospitality Management.
Allison Rashwell, Student Life.
Brian Scott, Athletics.
Great. So I have very few slides, which hopefully will be good, because my purpose here is to more engage you in a conversation about how to deal with difficult situations, but I wanted to give you a basic framework to keep in mind as we have that discussion. One of the things that I know that we're on video, I wanted to state from the beginning is that we are talking about how to deal with things that may be sensitive or confidential in a way that is respectful of our personnel and the people that may be involved in a situation. And one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do is to help me in a discussion about how to deal with those situations. So I would like to caution you at the beginning is, as we have that discussion, think about how to posit your hypotheticals in a way that would not be suggestive of who might be involved or particular situations that you're having difficulty with. So to get started, one of the things that we need to keep in mind as we're dealing with, especially as supervisors or even as employees who are asked to participate in certain things, is what our overarching goals are. And so I wanted to remind you that we have policies in place at the community colleges that help us maintain an environment that ensures a safe and healthy academic and work environment. We also want to make sure that we're complying with applicable laws. And some of those laws address providing equal access to education or equal opportunity to employment. And oftentimes when we have difficult situations, these two factors are implicated in some way. And ultimately what we want to do is we want to try to resolve those situations effectively and equitably, and in a way that really suits our business needs. So there are lots and lots of places where there's a need for confidentiality. Everyone is familiar with the general provision that personnel information should be maintained confidential, and we should not be sharing that except to the extent necessary to do our jobs. Related to that, there are oftentimes personnel issues that have to do with performance. And while we want to deal with the performance issues, we want to do it in a way that's very sensitive and respectful and achieves the outcomes we want to achieve. But we don't need to discuss especially exactly what the performance issue is with everyone in the department. And so we want to be careful about that. Another place where confidentiality often comes up is that we have internal investigations. And we have lots of different varieties of internal investigations. We have students who may come forward and suggest that there is a discriminatory atmosphere within their classroom. We have students who come forward who may bring to us issues that are related to other students, and we have to undertake an investigation in that way. And then we also have investigations that are personnel investigations that may involve simply the workplace environment itself. So it's between two employees, and it may be between colleagues, and it also may be between an employee and his or her supervisor. So when we undertake investigations, we tell those who are involved in the investigation process, both the person who's conducting the investigation and those who are either complainants or respondents or witnesses, that we do so in a way that is as confidential as possible. And so when we have an investigation, one of the things we do is we try to figure out exactly what the globe of witnesses that really need to be involved would be. So I can give you an example of if we have a classroom situation where we have a class that includes 30 students, and there's a claim of discrimination, and the claim involves discriminatory remarks made by a professor in the middle of class. That's brought forward by a complainant. The investigator would likely, when questioning the complainant about the event, ask the complainant to tell the investigator who is most likely to have heard the comment, because it may be that all 35 heard the comment, but we don't want to expand an investigation to include all 35, because that would not be necessary in order to achieve our objective. So sometimes the investigator would say, who was sitting next to you, who was sitting behind you, who talked to you about it after class. So when we do those things, we always want to keep it as tight as possible, but at the same time, make sure that we are being fair. So we don't want to have just the student and their best friend be the only witnesses to that kind of comment. We want to make sure that we have the information corroborated by enough witnesses, but not spreading it beyond what is necessary. The other place where we oftentimes have a need to either know or discuss information that may be confidential involve employees or students who have either ADA or FMLA needs. And just to give you a broad overview of ADA and FMLA, ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the FMLA is the Family Medical Leave Act. And both of these statutes require us to provide accommodations to the extent that it would be necessary to allow an employee to fulfill their job functions, and if they can do that with the accommodation, then we need to allow the accommodation. Oftentimes, with respect to the ADA and the FMLA both, one of the accommodations that we are seeing more and more of is a request for leave. And it's either a request for a small continuous period of leave, or it may be a request for intermittent leave. And intermittent leave becomes very tricky in making sure that we are granting it appropriately, because sometimes intermittent leave would be, I have a medical condition, and because of my medical condition, I have to go to a doctor's appointment, and the doctor's appointment is every Thursday at 9 a.m. And so we grant that as intermittent leave, where every Thursday morning that employee is allowed to go to the doctor's appointment. And it may be for a short period of time, or it may be for a continuing period of time. The other way that it comes up and is sometimes more difficult to negotiate is that we have an employee who has a condition, and oftentimes in the scenarios it comes up termed as that has flare-ups, and that when the flare-up occurs, they need to take leave. And so it is not the every Thursday at 9 o'clock appointment situation. It's more of the, well, I will either need to, when I have a flare-up, call in sick on the day that I have the flare-up, or it may be that I will be at work and need to leave work for a period of time. Sometimes we've had requests that talk about conditions that require additional breaks different than the ordinary breaks that we provide to our employees, and that those are needed in order to satisfy the ADA and the FMLA. All of those requests, both are, just for your information, generally supported by medical documentation. So it's not as though everybody gets to come into work and say, I need to have this special treatment because I have a medical condition. And some are obvious and more obvious than others, but to the extent that it's something that is not obvious to the casual observer, such as a person who is obviously uses a wheelchair for accessibility. Those things are generally supported by medical documentation. And there's a review of the medical documentation, and there's a conversation back and forth between the Human Resources Department and the employee. And so this is not something that comes up without some discussion behind it and without an understanding of how it may affect the work environment and how it may affect the employee's ability to get their job done. And it is also done, so you know, consistent with all of the policies that we already have in place. And so when we try to figure out what will work and what won't work, we keep in mind leave policies. Is that if employees are expected as part of their regular job to be here from 8:30 to 5, then the conversation happens within the context of those general expectations. And it may be that the accommodation says, well, we could still get our business needs fulfilled and then change your working hours from 9 to 5:30. Or it could be a 7:30 start that is necessary. So there are a whole host of things that are taken into consideration, but you should know that all of it is figured out within the context of our general policies and also in our collective bargaining agreements, and also within the context of the expectations of the job functions that the employee is expected to perform, and then as well within the for compliance with the law. So that's the basic groundwork. The last thing that I want to say on this slide has to do with the need to know basis. So it may be that when an employee requests for some reason an accommodation that would change their work hours from 8:30 to 5 to beginning at 7 to 3:30. It may be a night vision issue, and then in the winter there's decreased night vision and they can't get to work. And I'm not saying that that would necessarily be granted, but let's use that as an example. Is that in the winter hours there's a need to start earlier because there's a reduced night vision. And so there would probably be an initial discussion with Human Resources and the department head to figure out whether or not that meets our business needs. There would not be a discussion with the department overall about, well, if we're going to grant this request, you know, how does everybody else feel about it? So all of these discussions are really on an as-needed basis. You really have, in order for you to be specifically included in the conversation, there has to have been some specific need for you to know that information. And the reason why we do that is because it is personal and sensitive information, and we should not be sharing it. The only reason that we got access to that information is because of the particular employee's need for that.
How would you respond to a coworker who questions that person was granted that?
Exactly where we're headed. So on to the next slide. So, coworkers. So say we go through this process and we grant the request that is made for an employee to, instead of beginning their day at 8:30 in the morning, begin their day at 7:30 so that they can get their 8 hours in or 7.5 hours in and still be able to drive home while it's still enough daylight. Then we have a whole bunch of other employees in that same department that say, wow, I'd love to get off at 4:30. That would be so awesome. Why can't I get off at 4:30, this other person? And so there are these general perceptions of inequity, right? Is that everybody would love to start at 7:30, and when we make this exception, the rest of the colleagues say, that doesn't seem fair to me. How come this person gets to do it? The other thing that comes up is that there sometimes may be a perception that there's a disruption of the workflow. is that we need to get this done. Students are here during this time period, and by granting this specific request, there's a disruption generally for the department in their workflow. And then, of course, there's always the, well, of course, it's the slacker who got to, the special treatment, and, what are you doing? Because they're not doing their work anyway. So there's a whole host of things, and I don't know if you have any other specific examples, but those are the ones that came to mind when I was thinking about it, is that that's what happens within the work group, is they're like, ugh, and now they get that, and you're the supervisor, and you're sitting there saying, well, I really can't talk about, why this person is being able to come in at 7:30, and the rest of them are not granted. And so you have that predicament of, first of all, how do I respond specifically to that question, and how do I handle the making sure that we have an overall positive environment, because when you start getting those questions, then you get into the environment changes, is that there may be a resistance to actually work as well with the person who's asked for the request. There may be, cliques that have already exist may become even more entrenched because of that kind of stuff. And that's the biggest part of what I wanted to talk with you about, and not so much me talking to you, but kind of like helping you figure out what those discussions might look like. So I figured out basically 2 rules. One is that you should, in the best way you possibly can, simply decline to discuss sensitive or confidential information. And so if the question is simply, why does so-and-so get to start at 7:30, is that you simply don't answer that question. You just say that so-and-so's hours are 7:30 to 4:30 now, and that is a decision that has been made. If you would like to talk about some other things, and so what I would do is I would take a question like that is a broader one, and basically get it focused back on what the business needs are, and ask that person, how does that affect the department's work? Is if you could figure out a way to say, we have the between 7:30 and 8:30, this work is being done, which is helpful to the department, and that is what's going to be the focus of that time period, if that would be appropriate. I know that when you have departments that are really engaged in student services, that there are certain coverages that are very certain, that are very sensitive, and that there may be a general policy that we have a rotation. So say there was a rotation in effect, and that basically you took that employee out of the rotation and assigned them to a steady thing, is that you would get engaged in a conversation about, we're trying the rotation. The reason we do the rotation is that that most people have duty at this specific time, and we're going to continue the rotation. And I can't really get into any further discussion as to why this person's out of the rotation, but you need to trust that what we are doing is appropriate for the college. And I just, it's really hard because people really want to get into that. But what you shouldn't do is you shouldn't say, I can't really discuss it because it's an ADA issue. That gives people information that they otherwise don't have. Or I can't really discuss it because it's a personnel issue. Don't you worry, I'm taking care of it. Things that would suggest that there's a performance issue. And you'll get pushed for that kind of information. But if you're very consistent in your firm, let's not discuss that. Let's talk about the overarching problem that you might be, concerned about. And so I do think that you can invite the conversation about the workflow issues and how are we going to get what we need to get done, and how are we going to have coverage for those areas. But I don't know if anyone else has any kinds of samples of things that they have experienced that have been difficult, more in the general sense, as I said at the beginning, that you wanted to bring up and kind of like talk through.
Well, just in the situation that you discussed, we're a pretty small institution, and a lot of times people will disclose to their coworkers that, oh, I've got this going on with my health, or you know, I'm being written up for this. Or,
Yep.
So if the person is more specifically around health issues, if somebody has already disclosed that to the other members of the team,
Yep.
and then somebody from the team comes to you as a manager to say, well, geez, I have these questions or concerns, so-and-so told me, blah, blah, blah.
Yep. Yep.
Can that shift the conversation, or?
I think it shouldn't. I think that you should decline, you should still decline. And I think that what I would do is the same thing as I described before. So-and-so said that they have to do da-da-da-da, and ask them, you know, you're bringing this to my attention for a reason. You feel as though something is impacting the way that the workflow of the department is happening. Let's have a discussion about what your concerns are. You know, is it that these tasks are stacking up and that they're not getting completed because of a lack of coverage at this time or that time? Is it because you know, having a person who is assigned to desk duty or, you know, service duty, and maybe circulation duty, having that person suddenly cut out during the middle of the day and then having to fill that with some other personnel, you know, is that the problem? And when that occurs, how can we better address, you know, the filling of the thing? Is it because so-and-so is always being asked to fill and they actually are involved in this, and maybe we could find a different person to do the filling? And so you see what I'm saying is that you shift the conversation more to let's figure out what the problem is that you've identified, and let's figure out how we address that problem instead of, because what's really underlying all of those questions that you asked is, I want to be able to stand in judgment of whether or not that was a good enough reason. And that all of you as supervisors have to send the message that we don't get to do that. We don't get to say, you know, when Human Resources took a look at this, they didn't understand that, you know, we need to get this, that, and the other thing done. And this person's suggestion that whatever they are dealing with isn't good enough. Or it means that they really can't do the job, because it's not your role as a supervisor to decide whether or not the essential functions of the job can be met given those circumstances. And that's really what they're trying to get at. And what you need to do is really to try to shift it. And then in that conversation, one of the things that might happen is that it dawns on you that, oh, so this is the way we've been trying to address this issue. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe we've got to go back to HR and say, you know what, this is not working for my department, and these are the reasons why it's not working. And so maybe, you know, and maybe at the end of the day, it would go back to the assessment of whether the essential functions can get performed with the accommodation. But it's that kind of stuff. But don't, you know, by me saying that it's trying to basically reassess decisions that have been made by those in the HR department or in the president's office or something like that. I don't mean to say that your feelings about how work is getting done and whether or not it's being effectively done are not important, because they are. It's just that you need to figure out how to bring them back up in a way that is productive and not simply that so-and-so shouldn't get that because we don't think that their excuse is good enough. But because you should always bring up, if there are real workflow issues that are created by the situation, those things should always go back up so that people are aware of them. I hope that helps. Any other cheeky things you want to discuss? And on the faculty side, it's hard for me to, faculty things have come up with really coverage issues with respect to classes and in a variety of circumstances. And most often the questions come up with whether or not the essential functions are being addressed. So, so for example, if you are a faculty member who is assigned to do, your entirety of the role is that you do both labs and the classroom, and then you say, oh, by the way, I can only do classroom and I can only, then it may be that you can't fulfill the essential functions, but those are essential functions questions and not so much workflow issues. So, any other questions or discussions? I think that's it. So at the end of the day, what I would suggest is that if you have real concerns, bring them back. Because there are lots and lots and lots of times where discussions that I've been involved with presidents and HR officers, and we thought that solutions would work where they don't work. And when they don't work, they come back and then we think it through again and try to figure it out. But we're always balancing the making sure that we are protecting employees' rights that they have under the ADEA, FMLA, whatever the rights are, with the business needs. And that's the balance that we always have to strike. So you are in the best position to determine what the business needs are, or at least to contribute to that discussion, because you're on the front lines doing the work. So don't be afraid of coming back and saying, this is not meeting our business needs, because we need to hear that. And don't think that decisions are ever final in any of these things, because they are not final. So, all right. Hope that was helpful. As much.